It was a thing, you know. It was what I did, and in my mind, you know, where I come from, my background, you know, if we're gonna
tell him to tone it down a little bit, we might have.
I tell him that every day whenever I talk to him. He always going live and just want to be
Instagram account where you see how well it connected.
Yes,
it's over the top. It's just shin to dome, doing. She's
beautiful.
She went down from that. You did a great job of pissing people off in your career, and that plays a factor.
Number 6. Al Iaquinta. Al Iaquinta is a former UFC fighter who competed in the lightweight division. Joe Rogan is a commentator for the UFC and has provided commentary for many of Iaquinta's fights. Iaquinta expressed dissatisfaction with Rogan's commentary during his fight against Khabib Nurmagomedov, feeling that Rogan was biased. During the UFC 223 main event, which saw Khabib Nurmagomedov defeat Al Iaquinta, Joe Rogan's commentary drew criticism from many MMA fans.
Iaquinta he's a legit crazy person. Like, that guy's crazy. He trashes hotel rooms. He's like, wake him up at 3 o'clock in the morning and he'll fight anybody.
Being crazy is a thing.
He was screaming. He was running around, and him versus Khabib would have been a very interesting fight because Paul is a big 155. I mean, look, Iaquinta can bang, and he's tough as shit, and he's got a wrestling background, which I think played a big factor in that fight.
The criticism was that Rogan's commentary leaned too far in the direction of Iaquinta and simultaneously disparaged the skill of Nurmagomedov. Joe Rogan responded to this backlash, offering an explanation and an apology in a lengthy Instagram post. He stated that when he commentates on someone as dominant as Khabib Nurmagomedov, he is constantly looking for cracks in their armor. On that Saturday night, he saw some of those cracks exposed by Al Iaquinta. He also stated that he was not biased against Khabib and that he was a massive fan of his. Rogan's goal when commentating on fights is to highlight the action and make it more exciting for the fans at home. He stated that if he had to go back and do it again, he would often be able to do a better job. Number 5. Derrick Lewis. Derrick Lewis is a UFC heavyweight fighter who has appeared in the Joe Rogan podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience. During one of his appearances, Lewis shared his favorite knockout with Rogan, which was against Alexander Volkov. Lewis recounted how he was being soundly beaten by Volkov for most of the fights before turning things around in the last 30 seconds and knocking out Volkov. Lewis said that the crowd's reaction and seeing the reaction of one of the actors from Guardians of the Galaxy made it all worthwhile.
I think you practice martial arts, but you definitely do. But to be a successful fighter, you've
Yes, my brother remind me of that all the time. He thinking that the fighting is so easy because he's about 250.
Oh, there we go. Well,
but he's short, though. He's short.
In another appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience, Lewis opened up about his past and recounted a street fight that landed him in prison. Lewis told Rogan that he struggled to deal with the situation financially and almost had his sentence extended to 5 years due to violation of probation. Joe Rogan has also provided commentary for many of Lewis's fights. During one of memorable moment, after Lewis won a tough match against Alexander Volkov, he unexpectedly took his shorts off during the post-match interview with Rogan. Overall, it appears that the relationship between Derrick Lewis and Joe Rogan is professional, with Rogan providing commentary for Lewis's fights and hosting him as a guest on his podcasts.
Not having hope into being in this position now, and I mean, I can only imagine. It's got to be. Tell him to tone it down a little bit. We might have.
I tell him that every day whenever I talk to him. He always going live and just want to be.
Is he interested in doing it?
Yeah, he is, but I told him no, we're not doing it.
Number 4. Michael Bisping. Michael Bisping, born on February 28, 1979, is an English actor, sports analyst, commentator, and retired mixed martial artist who competed in the middleweight and light heavyweight division of the UFC 1. He is a former UFC middleweight champion, a former Cage Rage light heavyweight champion, and the Ultimate Fighter 3 light heavyweight tournament winner. At UFC 78, he became the first British fighter to compete in a UFC main event, and at UFC 199, he became the first British fighter to win a UFC championship. He was inducted to the UFC Hall of Fame on July 5th, 2019. Bisping began training jiu-jitsu at the age of 8. In 1994, at the age of 15, he competed as an amateur in Britain's first no-holds-barred competition called Knockdown Sport Budo, KSBO, which was a precursor to modern MMA. At the age of 18, Bisping decided to abandon his martial arts training to pursue real life. But less than a year later, he began training in boxing, kickboxing, and karate on the advice of Alan Clarkin, owner of Black Knights Kickboxing.
A great job of pissing people off in your career, and that plays a factor. That whatever you can do to get just
it was a thing, you know. It was what I did, and in my mind, you know, where I come from, my background, you know, if we're gonna
would wish that fighters were respectful and just, you know, treated it
well
the martial arts way and bow to each other.
The former UFC champion has had disagreements with Rogan's viewpoints, both in terms of fight commentary and broader issues. He has worked alongside Joe Rogan as a commentator for UFC events. Bisping has described working with Rogan, who he calls the godfather of MMA commentary, as fantastic and a desired opportunity. Bisping was given the chance to call a pay-per-view event alongside Rogan for the first time at UFC 272, which was headlined by Colby Covington and George Masvidal. Bisping has also appeared as a guest on Joe Rogan's podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, where he discussed his career and shared stories from his life 23. Overall, it appears that the relationship between Michael Bisping and Joe Rogan is professional, with the two working together as commentators for UFC events and Bisping appearing as a guest on Rogan's podcast.
In front of your opponent and send a message to him, you know what I mean? And if you get in his face and you can just I mean, don't get me wrong, he was great as well. You know, it wasn't just the trash talk.
No, he's great as well. I think the Nate Diaz fight,
I see his point. I understand what he's saying, but it's entertainment and it gets people. That's another reason why I used to do it. You're trying to sell the fight.
Number 3. Alistair Overeem. Alistair Overeem is the former UFC heavyweight fighter who has interacted with Joe Rogan, a commentator for the UFC, during post-fight interviews. One notable interaction between the two occurred after Overeem's loss to Stipe Miocic at UFC 203. Overeem took issues with Rogan's questioning in a post-fight interview after claiming he felt a tap from Stipe Miocic, which wasn't apparent in the replay. During the post-fight interview, Overeem claimed that he felt Miocic tap out while in a guillotine choke early in the first round. Rogan, unsure of whether the cameras may have missed the tap, asked the production truck to cue up the replay of the guillotine. After 2 different angles and no sign of a tap from Miocic, Overeem stood beside Rogan with a bewildered look on his face. The awkward exchange prompted Rogan to speak out about how uncomfortable he is speaking to fighters who have just suffered a massive brain trauma in the form of a knockout. Rogan, who has worked UFC events dating back to 1997, has talked to enough fighters to know Overeem's statements were likely more than a bald-faced lie. It'll be interesting to see how the UFC handles Rogan's request, especially since there is plenty of validity in his statements. It's great for the fans and the media to hear from the loser of a big fight immediately after in the octagon. But Rogan feels it shouldn't be prioritized over the continued medical attention of a fighter recovering from a knockout. Number 2. Germaine de Randamie. Germaine de Randamie is a Dutch mixed martial artist and former kickboxer who was born on April 24th, 1984. She is defeated in sanctioned kickboxing bouts and competes in the Ultimate Fighting Championship, UFC, where she was the first UFC women's featherweight champion. Prior to joining the UFC, de Randamie competed in the Strikeforce featherweight division. She is also known as the Iron Lady and has a professional MMA record of 10 wins and 4 losses.
Fun. I want everybody to know.
we didn't talk about fights at all.
It's okay. You know why?
Did you? Okay, let's go over it real
All
quick.
I said was
Do you
Cyborg's
feel-
gonna punch a
Do you
bitch in
feel
the
like
face.
you got that? She landed that question mark kick. That was beautiful.
Beautiful.
She hit it
Knocked
behind
her
the
down.
shoulder, came over the top, blang.
I gave-
Instagram account where you see how well it connected.
Yes.
It's over the top. It's just shin to dome, dude. She's
It's
rocked.
beautiful.
She went down from that. That was,
Able to
Do you
Yes.
think that's a good rule or a bad rule?
I think the new one-handed rule is perfect. I think that's perfect.
So what is that?
She has interacted with Joe Rogan, a commentator for the UFC, during post-fight interviews. One notable interaction between the two occurred after Durandamy became the first ever UFC Women's Featherweight Champion at UFC 2081. During the post-fight interview, Rogan talked with Durandamy about her victory and her thoughts on the fight. In a recent episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, Rogan spoke about trans athletes competing in combat sports and mentioned Jermaine Durandamy while watching her fight a man in 2007. Rogan said he doesn't mind if women fight men if the decision is voluntary. It is no secret that transgender athletes have always been a sensitive topic in combat sports, and Joe Rogan has been outspoken about it. The thing that Joe Rogan is against is people saying there aren't advantages for trans athletes, although he supports transgender people in general. His stance changes when it comes to professional sports.
It was bad. It was bad to the point where we all went, oh, like Daniel Cormier was next to me.
It's horrible.
It was the first time I did a commentary with Cormier. Then Holly did do more damage in 2 instances. One with the question mark kick, and another time she dropped her with a straight left.
Yes.
Which one's off balance?
The head kick?
No.
No,
She said
sir.
herself she was dazed.
Nasty combo.
She said herself she was dazed, and there's a picture of it on Mike.
Number 1. Chris Cyborg Justin. Chris Cyborg Justino and Joe Rogan have had a strained relationship due to comments by Rogan on his podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, in 2015. During an episode of the podcast, Rogan and Tony Hinchcliffe made inappropriate comments about Cyborg, suggesting that she had male reproductive organs. Cyborg expressed her distaste for the UFC commentator via her official Twitter handle, saying, "After listening to Joe Rogan make jokes that I would be the first UFC fighter to cut off their private organs to make a weight category, I never felt comfortable with him as a commentator for my fights, and knowing he was working an event of mine always added stress as an athlete."
IV vitamin
I
drip.
swear by him, brother. I swear
I
by
did
him.
a bag and a half, and I was ready to run through a wall. I
You
had
don't
3 hours
to come to
sleep.
your house.
Amazing for like pumping you up.
Not
that time in Vegas I had to get it.
What was
I
wrong again?
we had you had a show there, and like
Listen, say what you want about Dana, and I do like it. Like we always say, can you imagine if another commissioner did this? Another
Cut right there.
Well, I'll tell you this right now. Dana's too smart. Let's say he thinks that. Well, shit. Yeah. Same thing happened to me with me and Nate Diaz had our confrontation. I didn't say any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Someone made that all up.
Yeah.
Cyborg also revealed that her children often suffer the consequences of inappropriate comments made by Rogan. They were harassed by kids at school who repeated the color commentator's remarks, according to Cyborg. In response to the remarks made on the show, Cyborg labeled the statements as hurtful and not comedy. Rogan did apologize for the incident back in 2015 and admitted he'd had a few drinks before recording the podcast. He also added he didn't intend on hurting her feelings. Despite this, it seems that the relationship remains strained. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.